What's worse, seed oil or hydrogenated oil? They're just as bad each other. Hydrogenated oil is basically more stable. It will actually have less primary, secondary oxidative products and less aldehydes. But because it's changed its structure, it can incorporate into tissue and cause signaling problems. Signaling problems. So if a fatty acid that is hydrogenated, like a trans fat, or or like in cases that are certain types, maybe a carbon 16, which is similar to palmitate, and it'll incorporate into the lung surfactant. What it can induce over time, if you've got too much of that, is incorrect signaling of the lung surfactant. So the gas exchanges don't happen properly. And then you can end up with a thing I call structural asthma, which is what my vegetarian younger sister had until I corrected it after. It took about 10 months to fix that problem. So it can incorporate and actually cause signaling problems. It's hydrogenated. On top of that, it can do another thing, not only that sort of problem, but if you've got inappropriate signaling and cells are not functioning properly, over time they can shift to senescence a bit quicker so that you can age the system. So that's a problem in itself. Seed oils, on the other hand, are toxic oils, less stable, coming out of a refined factory. It's sort of the same poo for crap, but the difference is with the seed oil is it's much higher in these primary and secondary oxidative products. So it tends to be a bit more problematic. It can, it can rip, electrons off different tissue types, causing more reactivity and more oxidation. And also the aldehydes can rip lipid membranes. So the bilayers, everything's a bilayer. One is a hydrophilic, another hydrophobic part of like cell walls or any things in the body. It can rip those structures and cause leakiness in the cell. So it can damage the cell. That's what aldehydes can do from these seed oils. So they can be very damaging to the membrane structures of cells, cell walls. So they work slightly different, but they're just as nasty and bad. And all of them basically all they are much higher in deuterium as well, and that is damaging to the mitochondria, especially when the levels are much higher, because the cutoff is 130. And through the Krebs cycle, where water production is produced, you also can swap out the deuterium ions with hydrogen ions that don't have a neutron. And as a consequence of that, you can actually create metabolic water, which is clean, neutron-free, which means it will produce energy without slowing down the ATP synthase, the rotational complex 5, the ATP synthase from rotating at high RPMs, and it can slow that down, or it can bust it completely. If there's too many neutrons that come through, then it can bust that completely, and then you're stuffed. Then all these folds in the mitochondria that you get, that's the inner matrix between the mitochondrial membrane and the matrix. There's all these folds, and those little grooves that are like that, they've got electron chains on both sides, and in that fold, that's where the concentration gradient of the protons happen, and then that pushes against and goes through the ATP synthase. Now, in that, if through that water, metabolic water that's being created, you get too much neutrons in there, they will come through. They're much larger, and they will bust those motors. They can't fit properly, and they will bust those motors, and then you will lose mitochondrial dense energy production capacity. And over time, as you move away and you've got less energy to support your muscles, to heal your cells, then what happens over time is those cells become more aged, more senescent, more damaged, and can also move towards cancerous state, if they're not eliminated properly, especially if you've got also immunosenescence. That means your immune system is more senescent, can't kill off those damaged cells. well, then they could turn into cancerous ones. So it's all this sort of stuff. That's why an ancestral diet does provide that additional support to make these things work much better. But they're just as bad, but they work in different ways, in that regard. So obviously, something which is a fatty acid that basically has been hydrogenated can still be used for energy, no different than the polys in the PUFA in the seed oils can be used. And they can add within the metabolic water a certain level of deuterium, and that's the problem. So we want to keep as many of those ions out of the system, and the cutoff is about 130. Our bodies have got the ability to deuterium deplete. The sun can actually add an 18 parts per million per hour if your whole body exposed. And also, but at the same time, there's the problem of, excess. Once you get, like sugars are pretty much between 147 to 100 and close to 160, depending on how refined they are. When it comes to seed oils and these hydrogenated oils, they can be double that. Like, most seed oils are around the 255 parts per million. Now, if you're taking in about 40% of your intake is coming from these seed oils, and currently that's what it is for most people that are eating processed garbage out there, getting a lot of seed oils, that's a problem because you're putting far too much of a load of deuterium in the system, and it just doesn't physiologically have the enzymatic capacity to remove those things. So as a consequence, they're going to damage your mitochondria. So either one is going to be damaging, and one slightly works a bit different than the other. One is more like aldehydes, primary oxidative products that create a lot of oxidation, in the blood vessels and all in a whole lot of areas. And then the other one incorporates and can be used for energy, causing problems. The hydrogenated stuff can be used also for energy. That will cause problems, but also in the other case, it will also, cause signaling problems. So not a good, neither of them are good. So one's in, the hydrogenated stuff tends to be the sort of the margarine type things. And obviously the seed oils tends to be the stuff that most people cook nowadays because it's cheap. Actually, 40% was coming from the Ukraine. Cheers, Putin. There's less seed oils out there. Even though what he did was, yes, naughty, violating somebody else's territorial integrity. But yes, there were a lot of other politics behind that, and we won't go into that. We've discussed that before.